Yasas. What happens when you take two vibrant brothers that are descendants from the Greeks in Constantinople, embracing their American roots, and then ask them to serve up rich tales of traditions, cuisine, childhood memories, and a hearty dose of humor? You're about to find out. This is Baklavine Banter, your passport to all things Greek.
Welcome to Baklavan Banter. I'm Petraki.
And I'm Soto.
So with the success we had with our top 10 Greek desserts that we did in our previous episode, we are going to drill down on Greek food this week.
Oh, my favorite.
So we are going to do a top 10 most popular Greek foods or Greek meals, not including desserts. But before we do that, why don't you tell everybody what we're going to discuss it's going to wrap everything together in today's episode.
Yeah, so this is really cool. You know, when we look at food history, not just Greek food history, but all the famous cuisines in the world, you know, French, Italian, and so forth, every cuisine throughout time ends up having sort of its heroes, its influencers that have elevated that cuisine for what it is. The French have individuals like Auguste Escoffier, commonly considered the king of chefs, who came out with a book called La Guide Culinaire. The Italians had Pellegrino Artusi, who wrote a book called Science in the Kitchen and the Art of Eating Well. Well, Greek cuisine has the same hero, and his name is very common throughout, you know, especially since the early 1900s in Greek cuisine, and his name is Nikólaos Tselementés. Now, every Greek household, when I say that, to those listening in the audience, if you grew up like we did, you know, our mother had this, right? It's about 400 pages. And this became sort of, it's the Greek equivalent of having a joy of cooking. And so the book, Cooking and Baking Guide, was published in 1926. And ever since then, it's been synonymous with just about every cookbook in Greece, at least even from an inspirational perspective. Now, Nikólaos Tselementés was born in 1878. He was born on the island of Sifnos, which is part of the Kyklades group of islands in the Aegean. He grew up in Athens, where he finished high school. He worked in a notary office, but he was involved with cooking because his family was in it. His uncle owned a restaurant, and so he had an early exposure to that early on. He ended up studying culinary arts for about a year in Vienna, and when he returned, he basically worked as a chef in various embassies. Now, his initial fame occurred in about the 1910 time frame through the magazine called Cooking Guide, which contained recipes, dietary advice, international cuisine recipes, and so forth regarding food. In 1919, he ended up being the manager of the Hermes Hotel, which I think was in Athens. And a year later, he left, came to the United States, where he worked at some of the most expensive restaurants, including at the St. Moritz Hotel in New York City. In the meantime, he continued with his higher education within the culinary arts, including making pastries and, you know, learning all about dietetics and so forth. Now, his book, as I said, was published in 1926. It became so popular that it was reprinted more than 15 times within all those decades. As a matter of fact, the one that I have here says 1962. And if you go online in some of the vintage bookshops, if you don't own a copy, you may be able to find it, but it's been out of print for a while, so it's rare. Now, he returns to Athens. He finds where he founded a small cooking school. In the 1950s, he published Greek Cookery in English, which provided Greek cuisine to the English-speaking world for the first time. So in that aspect, he was also a little bit like what Julia Child was to French cooking in the U.S., he was to Greek cooking. And, you know, he came under a little bit of, he came under fire a little bit because some of his recipes, some of which we talk about, he borrows from other cuisines, from the French, for example, and he elevates the traditional Greek recipes to ultimately create a recipe that his recipes out of his books are typically considered the standard bearer for this. Some of the recipes that he's known for sort of elevating and creating, moussaka, pasticcio, anguinades, and so forth. So
Chef Boyardee.
just an incredible story. He ended up passing away in 1958 in Athens. He was about 80 years old. But the legacy that he left behind is just, if you're not familiar, especially if you're second, third generation Greek and you sort of didn't grow up with this book being part of the sacred collection in the kitchen, you know, look into it. We'll talk about it in a little bit, as Petrakis said, but just awesome in terms of influencing what we know as Greek cuisine today.
How do you pronounce his last name again?
Tselementés.
Tselementés?
Yeah. It's
Tselementés.
It's Tselementés.
Any relationship to Chief Tertelli?
I don't think so.
Because I think they did a collaboration together. One did the music, the other did the food. And you know what they came out with?
What did they come out with?
The chicken dance. Anyways, but
that's bad. That's just...
But so would you say, like, knowing what you know about him, do you think if he was alive today, okay, hypothetically speaking, do you think he would be like an Iron Chef?
He could be. I mean, if you
or like, would he be a judge on Top Chef or on Chopped? Would he have a Food Network show? Would he be? Do you think he'd be beloved like a Gordon Ramsay, or do you think he'd be like I don't want to use the word. I'll use the word disliked, like a Bobby Flay.
I think, first of all, I think he would make an interesting chef because of the various backgrounds he has. I mean, if you fast forward and you look at, you know, those that have gone to culinary school today, in you know, whether it's in the United States, you know, if you go to the Culinary Institute of America, you go to Johnson and Wales, or you go to you know, the Cordon Bleu and places like that. Part of the curriculum, they're certainly heavy in French cuisine. A lot of the sauces, you know, the mother sauces, for example, things like bechamel come out of that. They're classic. But there's a focus on understanding a little bit of everything. I think in some sense in those times it wasn't you focused more on one or the other. If you were a French chef, you studied French cuisine. It's not that things weren't influenced, but to me it's interesting because here's somebody who grows up in that industry and obviously understands traditional Greek food, but then goes off to Vienna and studies, you know, French cuisine. If you look at some of the recipes, especially if in the book that I just showed you that I have here, it's about 400 pages. The Greek cookery, the English version of that, is only 200 pages. So I'm thinking it's a subset of the broader book, right? But if you look in the Greek book and you look at some of the some of the labels and the recipe names and
the
so
translations,
forth, there's a lot of Greek in there, right? He talks about a technique called pane, P-A-N-N-E, which is basically putting something in breadcrumbs. But pane, the term, is a French term for doing that. He uses a lot of that And as I said earlier, and I didn't get any detail on this, but I read that there was, he came under some fire of, what are you doing to this cuisine? And as I said, what would moussaka be like if there was no bechamel on top? For example, today, when you think about it, you don't think about it, and nobody ever says, hey, did you ever
No.
realize that there's a French component in this? So
It would basically be like a yamista, it'd be stuffed.
Right.
It'd basically just be
Right.
a stuffed eggplant at the end of the day. That's all. That's all it would be.
right.
And the same thing. And the same thing would apply for like pasticcio as well.
And it's interesting, again, the book is out of print. Recipes, by the way, for those that aren't familiar with copyright law, recipes have been deemed, at least in the United States, I think it's in other parts of the world too, you can't copyright a recipe. And if you're a patent attorney and you know differently, let us know. But that's basically what I read. The reason I say that is because if you go now and you find a recipe for moussaka and you go and you compare what you find on the internet or on YouTube, you'll notice the similarities, and it's not surprising because he basically inspired. Here's the base, right? The recipe, like we mentioned, that we're going to talk about, that we'll go through. That's the baseline. That was his recipe. That's what he made. That's what he became famous for. Now you can take it from there and you can tweak it here and there. I mean, that's the beauty of food, is you make it your own. But to have started with a baseline from there and then be the inspiration for what comes after that, I think is kind of neat.
Yeah. So do you think he'd make a good judge on Top Chef? Do you think do you think he'd be a critical judge, or do you think that he would appreciate the variations of his own recipes if someone attempted it?
I think he would appreciate him. I mean, I haven't read anything in terms of his character. He seems to, he's got sort of in the beginning of the Greek cookery book, he has a note that he makes in there where he explains why some of the recipes in that book have Turkish names.
Yeah.
Right? So he has, for example, ekmek kadayıf in there. And basically what he says is that you got to remember that you have, I mean, this was our first show about being Greeks going back to Constantinople. When Constantinople fell, the Greeks that were there were basically, I don't know if forced is the right word, but they were basically using the Turkish name for what was a Greek dish.
Mm-hmm.
And so when all of that went down and now you had, a mass exodus of Greeks out of Turkey and so forth, that stayed. And now in the way he explains it is, so he said you have basically recipes that are Greek recipes developed by Greeks that are parading as being part of Turkish culinary art, if you will. And again, I'm not saying that to be political. I just thought it was interesting that he pointed that out. And I'm assuming he pointed it out because somebody looked at a recipe and said, what is this?
Yeah. Yeah.
So.
Yeah. But, when you think about him and his, for lack of a better word, legacy.
Yeah.
When you look at modern chefs, in a way, he's in a way like, I don't want to say his last in his breed, but in a way he was a trailblazer. A lot of these chefs now, he's in the same realm, I would say, as a Julia Childs. A lot of these guys today, and don't get me wrong, some of these guys, are excellent chefs. But I think once they hit their celebrity status, I think they kind of forget about cooking and concentrate more on their celebrity status. These guys, yeah, they're good at their craft, but they're not trailblazers. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And also when you look at things like, he comes from a line of chefs who could do it all. We're talking not only entrees, but he could also do desserts. Now, you have these culinary schools where, you're either going to concentrate on entrees or
Yeah.
desserts. It's now become almost a specialty market where chefs, oh, I'm just a dessert chef. You know what I mean? And I'm not saying that the great chefs of today can't do both,
Yeah.
but they're either really good at one and so at the other, vice versa. They don't really share that across the board broad spectrum from from like antipasta all the way through dessert.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
He,
hmm.
there's in every culture, there's sort of the purists that look at, this is the dish my grandmother made, this is how we made them. But he
Yeah.
basically started a trend. Another example of what I read, of sort of what I talk about, this trend. He started with his recipes. If you look at the modifications, recipes that initially called for olive oil, he would use butter, right?
Parquet.
Recipes that didn't have, what's that?
Parquet.
Yeah. Recipes and again, you're talking about, right, Greece, famous for their olive oil. Here comes this chef who's like, I'm going to use butter, right? I'm
Mm-hmm.
going to elevate sauces with cream
Yeah.
and cheese.
But again,
And
that, like you said, that's the French influence in there.
right, exactly. But that whole idea where he came in, and I read a great quote that I wrote down, and this came from a Greek food expert who basically said, the elevated style the foreign educated chef promoted was taken up by chefs and restaurants throughout Greece,
Yeah.
eventually spreading beyond the country's borders to become representative of
Mm-hmm.
what Greek food is abroad. And they said, this is a quote, Greeks are still led to believe that the delicious foods their grandmothers cooked, often the same dishes Italians have triumphantly publicized all over the world, are not good enough for modern affluent Greek society. And so, and it's interesting, by the way, because when I'm, as both of us were into all kinds of food,
Mm-hmm.
not just Greek, and I was watching something recently about top restaurants in different countries,
Mm-hmm.
and there's a restaurant that I think it might be a Michelin restaurant actually, I think it's in India,
Okay.
where basically this chef said, when people think takeout, right, Indian food is considered, in the United States, cheap takeout. You go
Yeah.
and you get this, you get that. Sort of like, I guess, Chinese food and so forth. And depending where you live, certainly, New Jersey, for example,
Yeah.
phenomenal Indian food, large population from all over. But his plan for his restaurant was to elevate Indian food, to have it given the same respect for being elevated as what people think about French food. When you think about French food, you don't think about
Yeah.
takeout. You know what I mean? And so
Yeah.
to me, that's
Yeah.
kind of that's where he pushed, and he pushed enough where other, I think, chefs that had the same desires to kind of learn a little bit about the rest of the world, not just stay within your own corner, to
Yeah.
elevate that cuisine, it became the standard. But I just thought, and again, when you look at these recipes, that's the neat thing about it, is when you see the butters and the creams and the types of things that
Mm-hmm.
are not indicative of some of the more traditional dishes.
Yeah. And when you think about it, we always talk about the Mediterranean diet.
Yeah. Yeah.
You can kind of see then in this with the French influence within his cooking, that even though the essence of a Mediterranean diet was there, you slowly saw a transition of a more of a much more of a Western Europe influence within Greek cuisine. And I think at the end
Yeah.
of the day, when you think about what he's done, I think he created more of a he cooked more for the masses, in the
Mhm.
sense of, you create a plate with 80% of it is still traditional Greek food, but you made it in a way where the palate would be much more acceptable or favorable to even not only the Mediterranean culture of within the Aegean, but also moved it to the Western culture now, where you almost create a brand new fan base to it. You
Yeah.
know?
And you could see, especially with the English version of the recipes, that, as I think I mentioned it yesterday, when he was working in the St. Moritz Hotel in New York City,
Yeah.
the compilation of that book, which is some of the same recipes he's always cooked,
Yeah.
but you get the feeling that the way that they're written up and so forth, that's exactly what he was making at the St. Moritz to make
Yeah.
him the and again, I'm assuming this based on the caliber of chef he is, that when he was working at St. Moritz cooking that stuff, that place,
Yeah.
that restaurant in the hotel must have been amazing.
Yeah.
At the same time, you know, one of the sections in the book is titled brains.
Yeah.
Right? 3 or 4 different recipes on how to cook lamb's brains.
Yeah.
So you ask yourself, is that something that in the time frame we're talking about, the early 1900s, was part of that
Yeah. I think cuisine,
the diner here was, yeah.
I think more so then than it is now. You know, there I think at the time,
Yeah.
you remember you're not going to waste any piece of an animal.
Right.
You know, so
Right.
you're going to cook whatever, you know, whatever you cook. I'm sure that's where the whole lamb's head came in, you know, the whole recipes like that, because meals were not cheap, especially if you lived in a small village. So you're going to eat everything that you could.
Well, and if it's interesting because that time in the United States really established not only a truly fine dining restaurant, but also
Yeah.
those cuisines. If you study, for example, you know, French cuisine, it was around, what was it, 1934, the World's Fair, where you basically had representing at the World's Fair, you had chefs from France that came here. Well, then all of a sudden, the beginnings of what became World War II started going on in Europe. Some of them stayed in the U.S. They became the foundation for the modern French restaurant. So
Yeah.
that whole time period that he existed in, right? This came out in 1926, was really the discovery of so much in this country of stuff that wasn't typical in American cuisine, and some people who hadn't get a chance to travel to be able to experience it. So
Yeah. So you know what? Let's move on. We'll kind of segue into our next part here, and because we're going to actually do the kind of roll into top 10
Yeah.
best most popular Greek dishes, not including desserts. But
right.
before we go there, just quick question for you. So while if you saw me looking down, it's because my phone was ringing and it was Mom. So
Oh boy.
I don't know if we should call her while we're doing this and put her on the air and see what she wants, or would you rather not wait? Because you know this
That could be
this may end up being like a 2-hour episode then.
or this part could get completely cut out because she will say things that won't pass the censors.
I'm gonna leave it up to you. What do you think?
No, I say we just continue.
Yeah, we'll put her on next time. So
Or we'll record this and then we'll call her and
yeah,
pretend like we're recording and see what she
if
says.
we find that the conversation is, as they say, safe for work.
Yeah, exactly.
Because it may end up being NSFW there. So, you know. But
Exactly.
so let's move in. These are the top 10 most popular Greek meals. Now, once again, I did a little research on these. I kind of took out the outliers, combined this down. For those of you watching, if you think something should be in here and it's not, feel free to reach out to us. And you know what? Convince us why it should be on the top 10 list.
I like that.
You know, I would love to hear other people's take on this. But again, this is not necessarily in the order of our favorite, because there's some things on here I'd be like, no way in hell, for my own personal reasons. But let me just give you our honorable mentions first. So our three honorable mentions are going to be bacalhau with scordalia. That's the fried cod cakes with a garlic sauce on top. The yemista, stuffed vegetables, whether it be with meat or rice. And the third would be the octopus, the grilled octopus. So those are our
Right.
three honorable mentions.
Nice.
And we'll do this from 10 down to 1. And on some of these, we are going to take the recipes from the cookbook we were just discussing. And we'll actually, at the end of the video, we'll actually have screenshots of the actual recipe in English. However, for those of you that are watching, because I know, let me tell you some fun fact, about between 50 to 60% of our viewers are from Greece.
Yeah, which is awesome.
So for those of you who want this in Greek, let us know and we'll post it in Greek. Actually, you know what I'll do? I think I'll post the English and the Greek. So at the end of the video, we're going to do screenshots of them. Just stop the video and you can watch them and then write them down. And let us know if you're going to actually use the recipes that we're posting. Please, if you create them, please take a photograph and give us a review on what you think.
Yeah.
Obviously, we're not going to create hundreds of, we just don't have the time.
Right.
We just don't. If I could sit down and make 10 recipes a day, trust me, I would do it. Okay. By the third day, you'd have to create a handicap ramp for me to get in inside of the house because, I'd be literally sitting around the house. Yeah. So let's start with this. Again, number 10 to number 1. So number 10 on the list is saganaki.
Oh, saganaki. Fried cheese.
Fried
Usually
cheese.
Halloumi. Gassetti.
Oh, yeah. That's all you, man. You know how I feel about that.
I know.
For those of you who want to know, listen, I'm going to offend a lot of people. I'm not a huge fan of cheese. I'm going to put it out there. A lot of people think I'm nuts, but I don't eat cold cuts either. So you just have to understand that. I'll eat pizza. I'll eat a cheeseburger, but I'm not going to sit down with a pizza feta cheese. And it's just, for me, I don't know if anybody else, it's just how the texture of the product is. I don't do I'll do quesadillas, everything melted, no problem. But like piece of raw cheese and this, no thanks, I'm out. But anyway, number 10, saganaki. Number 9, I've got lemon soup.
Oh, that's
lemon egg soup, which can also be used as a sauce. Correct. When you make dolmadas. So the stuffed grape leaves, when you stuff them with meat, you can also use that as a sauce on top of that. Right. Which brings me to number 8, which is dolmadas. Nice. Stuffed grape leaves. Again, stuffed with rice in oil, or cook them with ground beef, ground lamb. Yeah. Throw them in a pot. Still good. He prefers the meat. I prefer the rice. Tomato. Number 7 on the list: tiropitas, panikopitas, and kreatopita.
Right.
Okay. So basically, cheese pie. These are all phyllo dough based. Cheese pie, spinach pie, or meat filled pies.
Yeah.
Number 6 is souvlaki.
Always a classic.
Yeah, for those of you who don't know souvlaki, it's basically shish kebabs, meats on a skewer. Whether it's we've had this discussion before when they talk about souvlaki. Is it in the U.S.? It's very popular to have chicken souvlaki. Some places do pork souvlaki, but both very good. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to add, because we had this discussion yesterday. In general, when it comes to meats, even when you look at some of these recipes in the cookbook, pork and lamb were the predominant meats. You didn't have a lot of beef in Greek cuisine. Part of it, I think, was just it was less expensive. It was more readily available and so forth. And so when you look at things like gyro, where here you may go someplace and you may get a lamb beef or beef and so forth, if you go to in Greece, if you get the if it's not chicken, it's probably always pork. And so that's another dynamic in terms of Greek cuisine sometimes that that doesn't get understood. But
Yeah, and I think another reason is as far as the chicken aspect of it.
yeah,
I think chickens were only they weren't really viewed as a something you would eat. I think they were viewed as to get eggs out of them.
yeah, yeah,
So you weren't, and I think even though I think lambs and sheep milk were more relevant than cow's milk was,
right,
if cows were available, which they probably weren't, because you got to think of the terrain of Greece is very mountainous.
yeah,
So sheep and lamb would be,
goats,
Betsy wasn't going to climb those hills.
right,
You know what I mean? I'm not saying that they didn't have cows. If they did have cows, they weren't going to use it. They were going to use it for milk. They weren't for milk and making leather products. And it probably wasn't until Betsy got too old to produce milk that they put down the cow for its leather products.
right.
Which leads me to believe then when you make something like what is that? The tripe. So when you make
Skembe.
is that skembe or is it magiricha? Magiricha intestine?
No, magiricha is the entrails.
Okay. So was that?
That's, by the way, a recipe in the book. If you're curious, we'll share it.
But is that cow?
Yeah, it's the
It
cow
is, or is it
lining,
lamb, or is it lamb?
No, I think it was cow.
Okay.
I think tripe, which is basically what it is the cow
Stomach.
stomach lining. Yeah. Or
Yeah. Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Moving on.
Yeah.
That's that's the episode we're gonna do of top 10 Greek foods we'll never eat.
That's what I was going to say is I pretty much, just in general, not just Greek food, there isn't much I won't eat, but we had some of that. My father loved that. I think our grandfather loved that, but that was a hard pass. Magirica I could do around Easter. Actually, a church used to make it. The Philoptico used to make it downstairs when they had pizza for the kids and for everybody else they had the Magirica. But
our time in church is a completely different conversation because
exactly.
Let me tell you something. For us, if the Greek church, if for those of you who grew up in a Catholic household and you went to Catholic mass, you walk into a Catholic church and they had the holy water there. Well, they don't do that in the Greek church. Right. If they did, I assure you, by the time mass ended, there would be bags of Tempty tea in there, of Lipton tea, because it would be boiling by the time we left. Again, conversation for another time. So number 5. So number 6 was souvlaki. Number 5 is gyro. Delicious. It's just delicious.
Awesome.
Number 4 is tzatziki sauce, which could be used with the it's a yogurt,
dill, cucumber. Yeah.
And again, which is a lovely complementary to the souvlaki or the gyro.
Exactly.
So rounding up our top 3, number 3 is going to be pasticcio.
Yeah.
Number 2 is a classic with roasted lamb and potatoes.
Always awesome.
And our number 1 top 10 most popular Greek dishes is moussaka.
There you go.
Now, so those of you who are interested in the recipes, we will be posting the recipe for moussaka, for pasticcio, and for dolmades. So the stuffed grape leaves. Do you know, does it say in that recipe for the dolmades if it's for the meat or the they have both recipes, right?
Both of them are in there, yeah. So we can post both if you want for that. And again, these are not changed. Basically, what we're posting is an image directly from the Greek cookery book, the English cookbook, as it stood for decades. So this is an original.
So people understand this is an English translation.
Correct.
Right? Now, show them the book again. Hold it back a little bit because you couldn't see it before. So it's basically
this one right here.
Yeah, perfect.
I can see that element
So
down the bottom.
basically, it's the English translation from this book. Again, if for those of you watching in Greece, if you want the recipes in Greek, let us know.
Or from anywhere. You can be in Australia. You can be wherever there's
But
Greeks,
if you want them in Greek, let us know.
Yeah.
So, so those three again, we're going to share the recipes for moussaka, pasticcio, and dolmades. Just go to at the end of the video. You'll see them posted there. But that's pretty much it for the show today. We've kind of, made this episode specifically food based.
Yeah.
I think there's some of you out there that have really enjoyed our content of Greek food that we've put on the program.
Yeah.
We will definitely continue with it, but it may not always be a food specific episode like this is. Again, if there's a recipe or there's an item in the top 10 list or honorable mentions that you didn't necessarily agree with, you didn't agree in the order in which we post them, if you thought there was something on there that we didn't talk about, please let us know. We would love to hear your feedback on this. Also, please remember to subscribe for us. Other than YouTube, you can find us on Spotify and any other place you can find your favorite podcasts. So I think I'm hungry right now. I'm going to be honest with you. And I already ate dinner and I already had dessert and I'm hungry right now. I'm not going to lie to you.
Yeah. We may at some point in the future, maybe we'll do a show from the kitchen.
If we can get Mom in a good mood.
Yeah, that would be.
Somewhere like, I don't know, maybe like Thanksgiving time, around something like that.
That would would be like Julia Child had a baby with Gordon Ramsay, is what that would be. Because
somewhere in that episode, we would get thrown out of the kitchen.
Yeah, definitely. Or there would be.
If I were to quote Gordon Ramsay.
Yeah.
If my mother to quote Gordon Ramsay, one of the funniest Gordon Ramsay quotes is, "There's so much salt and pepper in that dish, I'm pushing it." If you know salt and pepper songs, you'll understand that.
Yeah.
Anyway, guys, thanks for joining us this week. I'm Petraki.
And I'm Soto.
Until next time, have a great week.
Yassas.